Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. Blizzard keeps drip feeding us information about the balance changes. Last week they told us okay, next week we're going to take a look at them, and the week after that we can expect a patch. And today, Alec Dawson tweeted this. Had some great balance talks over the last few days. 5 nerfs, 10 buffs in next week's patch. Looking to bring up some underperforming classes and archetypes, there's some spicy stuff. And also, there was an interview on a Chinese website. According to a community interview with Alec, 2 neutral cards will be nerfed, including a Murloc. And Barrens Blacksmithing Battlegrounds will be removed. So this is what we have so far. We don't have the full list of nerfs and buffs yet, but next week the meta is going to change yet again. And all deck building will have to start anew. Yeah, so I'll have to start building new budget decks again. Well, next week. But what could those changes be? I could speculate a little bit. Well, 2 neutral cards are going to be nerfed. One of them's a Murloc. That's going to be Crab Rider. Crab Rider, I would probably guess it goes down to 1-3 stats, because then it becomes so much easier to remove for a lot of classes. So, okay, Crab Rider nerf. Then the second neutral card. I can think of 2 main candidates. There's the Venomous Scorpid, the one that discovers spells, and then there's Mankrik. And if I were to bet, I probably would bet on Mankrik instead of the Scorpid, specifically lowering the stats of the Enraged Mankrik, which is a 3 then that comes from your deck, so maybe a 3-6, 3-7, something a little bit more reasonable, so that it isn't just such a huge threat. That leaves us with 3 other cards that are going to be nerfed. Okay, so what would be the problem points? Paladin, of course, is incredibly strong, so probably they would want to touch Paladin. Crab Rider obviously touches Paladin already, but First Day of School is the real powerhouse of the class, so probably some changes to that. Thing is, if you make this cost like 1 mana, it becomes pretty useless. If you make this give 1 minion, it becomes useless. It's a really hard card to balance. Maybe it would give like a couple of some semi-status tokens, or something more specific instead of such a wide pool. But a really tricky one. Yet I think that's the most likely Paladin card to be touched. Then Incanter's Flow, especially a problem in Wild, to a lesser extent problem in Standard. I think that's going to be changed, probably 3 mana. Blizzard usually likes to nerf the mana cost. But then what about that 5th card? There are 2 real feel-bad classes in the game at the moment. Those are the Tigatus Warlock and Priest. And Priest is really tricky to touch, and also quite problematic because when you nerf these decks, you nerf things that beat Priest. So Priest becomes better, so you really want to touch Priest too, but how do you touch it when the whole class is built on just random nonsense? Everything in the class is random nonsense. They have like completely, totally, utterly ruined the entire class. So it's difficult to change it with just 1 card. So maybe they will hope that buffs will instead make Priest unviable enough. Maybe. But I would bet that Tigatus would get nerfed. Tigatus does prevent a lot of control decks from seeing play. Nothing to remove something like 3 cards from the deck. Would make it so that when Warlock is doing a little bit of tapping to get to Tigatus, then they just can't win the game with Tigatus anymore with fatigue so easily. Nor can they remove so many resources as quickly. So, with a nod to Venomous Scorpid and a nod to some Priest cards, these are my main candidates for nerfs. But what about buffs? They wanted to make unviable classes, unviable archetypes better. I think the buffs would focus mainly on the new cards from Fortune in the Barrens. That would make a lot of sense. Hey, you want to sell some new packs, you want to make your new expansion more exciting because the new expansion is really lackluster at the moment. So how do you find 10 cards from Fortune in the Barrens to buff? And unfortunately I think that means that Caravans are going to be buffed. There are 5 Caravans in Fortune in the Barrens, so if you buff all 5 Caravans, well, that neatly handles 5 of those buff slots, and it also promotes lots of archetypes that don't see play. Tiny Fin's Caravans at the start of your turn draw a Murloc. Maybe they turn it back to an end of turn effect. Maybe they increase stats. Something like that. So Tiny Fin's Caravans for those Murloc decks, Prospector's Caravan, some hand buffs for Hunter, but at the expense of making the deck a little bit slower. Could be interesting. Murloc Shaman could also be buffed by making Nothing Can Stop Us cost 2 mana. You could make that a little bit more effective. Right now it's too slow, it doesn't save the deck. Then they would also probably want to buff some other Shaman archetypes. Shaman is the weakest class by far by now. There's just nothing that you can do with Shaman at the moment. So there's Murloc Shaman, Totem Shaman, Aggro Shaman, Spell Damage Shaman, Elemental Shaman. I guess they would buff Elemental Shaman because that's the one that they're promoting with Fortune the Barrens. Making Lilibet Lurker cost like 4 mana would be one example of a way that Elemental Shaman could be buffed. And maybe buffing Murloc Shaman Elemental Shaman a little bit could do something. Hunter, Face Hunter is doing fine, no other Hunter decks are seeing play. Prospector's Caravan buff could maybe give you a little bit more leeway to play a slower Hunter deck. Pack Kodo. Maybe you could turn Pack Kodo into like a 2-mana 2/3 for example, so that you get it a bit easier out there. That line is a little bit better for its mana cost. It could also be a 3-mana 3/4, and then you still get the Discover effect that will also prompt a little bit slower Hunter archetypes. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot that you can do with Demon Hunters and Druids. There just doesn't seem to be any individual card that tuning a little bit of a knob there would actually make those classes much better. Like Death Rattle Demon Hunter, for example, there just aren't enough Death Rattle minions. You need a new expansion. You need at least a mini set to promote that one. And as for Druid, Token Druid, Clown Druid, both are somewhat playable at the moment. And if there's other nerfs and buffs, then maybe they will find a more suitable meta anyway. But keeping up with the Caravan theme, Soldier's Caravan, well, Paladin buff? Yeah, sure, why not? Promotes that sort of Silverhand Recruit archetype of Paladin. Might be okay. Apothecary's Caravan. At the start of your turn, summon a 1-cost minion from your deck. Maybe it's at the end of your turn. Promoting 2 Warlock. Yeah, sure, why not? Unfortunately, that would also mean that if they consistently change the effect of all the Caravans, they would also change the Priest Caravan. Priest doesn't need anything, and that Caravan only promotes random nonsense Priest even further. But it's probably too weak to fit in anyway, so if they just make a general change to the way Caravans function, they can change the Priest Caravan, it doesn't matter too much. As for Mage, the only Mage deck that sees real play is the No Minion Mage, but if they were to give a buff for the Reckless Apprentice, for example, Fire Hero Power to all enemies, maybe make it cheaper, so it just stats a little bit, something like that, maybe they can make Ping Mage a little bit better. I was also thinking about whether they could change Wildfire, that makes your hero power more powerful, but then people would just run that in No Minion Mage, and yeah, it wouldn't really solve anything. And for Warrior, we currently have the Rush Warrior, but we don't have the Taunt Warrior that they have been trying to promote, but they could choose Bulk Up. Bulk Up could be buffed, maybe make it cost only 1 mana, for example, so you can play Bulk Up on 1, and then you can already do stuff on 2, make it cheaper, make it easier to use. Maybe you can try to promote Taunt Warrior a little bit like that. If they were to buff some cards from last year or some cards from Corset, then there might be a few more alternatives, but giving 10 buffs, that's a lot, and it really screams to me that they are actually going to change the way Caravans function. Caravans were initially used in the promotion materials, but they were just mentioned a couple of times and then they were never showcased at all. Which leads me to believe that Caravans actually were better at the start, and then they were nerfed, and they were nerfed to oblivion. Maybe they can now find middle ground, where these Caravans will actually be a major part of Forged in the Barrens gameplay. We'll see. I hope that we're going to hear soon the details on the buffs and nerfs. And maybe, just maybe, Herathstone meta is going to be better again.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.